Welcome to Level Up Tribes. Level Up Tribes provides resources to help you attain the necessary resources to level up your mind, body, and soul and realize your full potential. It is about exploring, learning, providing you with the tools from the experts for you to create a better version of yourself. I am your host, Agnes Goodwine, and welcome, Tribes. Today, we are discussing how to level up our careers while bouncing back from this pandemic with Coach Ginny Cheng, Director of Recruitment with the Zillow Group. Ginny is also a career and leadership coach for Career Contessa. She's here to give us strategies in career development, mindset, interview preparation, personal branding, and much more. Welcome to Level Up Tribe Podcast, Ginny.
Thanks for having me.
So let's dive right in and discuss how you became involved in recruitment and leadership coaching before we delve into our topic of today.
Well, I consider myself a serial entrepreneur. So
I like it.
I believe that we have many callings and career paths have ebbs and flows. And you can be involved in multiple passion projects at once. So you're like a perfect example, right? Because you have a day job that you excel in, but you've probably found a way to amplify other people's voices through your podcast.
Yes.
After pivoting to my third career, which is in recruitment to help people find opportunities at Microsoft, Facebook, and now Zillow, I enhanced my growth by becoming a career happiness coach over 3-4 years ago. Basically to support, like what you said earlier, people's career exploration, personal branding, starting a side hustle, and even how to become an effective coach as a people manager.
So Ginny, it's been stated countless times that developing a mindset that is positive and focused sets the tone for positive performance in all areas of our lives. For someone who has recently lost their job, been furloughed, or struggling with finances at the present time due to this pandemic, what are the most important mental steps, in your opinion, to take? What do you suggest for people to do?
I know there's a lot of, mindfulness and mental mindset gurus out there. And the way I would kind of capture everything is to say, I think having a resilient mindset can be a superpower that we develop. And you're right, it's not just in an event of a job loss, but everything else in life. Now, it doesn't mean we don't go through the stages of grief or frustration. It just means that we need to find ways to move through them and get to acceptance quicker so that we're not paralyzed for too long. And the ability to adapt quickly is a valuable skill set, not just for the person that's been affected directly, but also for those around them, because it could motivate others to do the same. It also opens up the possibility that other people may come into, if you ask for help, you can attract support and opportunities and even intros. So I think that mindset will help you start on a more positive, track. And in terms of job loss, there's not one hack or solution because everyone's situation is different. So if you are in your early careers, say a new grad that just had their internship or their job rescinded, they shouldn't forget to rely on their career centers and connections that they've already made. Perhaps they already had a list of companies that they were considering. And I'm still seeing some VCs with portfolio startups that are still looking. Just know you're not alone in this situation right now.
What has been your own mental blueprints when it comes to achieving success? Have you had any insightfulness through this whole pandemic?
Absolutely. I do think sometimes when we feel like we don't have control, we try to find things that we can control. And, whether it's someone telling you you can control by wearing a mask or staying at home, like these are things we can control. And so for me, because I am a career coach by heart, I also know I wanted to volunteer my time to be on maybe webinars or career panels, things that I just volunteer my time so that I can share my either experiences or I can help people make connections, after a session. I think that is something I try to make sure I realize that I am very fortunate I'm one of the privileged and fortunate ones. And so if I have the ability to pay it forward now while I can, I think if everyone did that, I think this would be one of those where we can really, be successful and to come out of this.
I've read somewhere that the unemployment has increased like in records, high. Everyone is out there trying to find a job. What can you tell someone who is trying to find a job? How can they stand out?
There's a couple things, and I would say the advice I give or examples I give would be pre and post COVID. So it's not just during this time, although you're right, there are a lot more competitions, out there. I do think that having a good handle of your personal story or your experiences, and perhaps even how you've managed through adversity in the past, is a good start. It's not about what you did in your previous jobs or that you were, laid off or furloughed, but the how. So how did you do the job you did? What was the impact? And then how did you handle if you were one of those people that unfortunately lost their job due to COVID? Like, how did you step up? How did you manage to beat the odds, so to speak?
Yes.
It does mean that I would say your resume and LinkedIn should not read like a job description. It should be unique blueprint to the results of your work. Why would someone hire you, as a result of your work and your impact? And I'm fairly certain a question about how you managed through COVID or how you've helped someone else through COVID will probably come up in an interview. But why would you even wait for them to ask in case they don't ask? You should incorporate that in your 60-second intro. When they ask, tell me about yourself. Just add that component of what's timely is a good way to stand out.
Many job interviews currently are being held virtually due to the pandemic. What tips would you suggest that could best prepare someone for their virtual interview?
Well, luckily, if you're interviewing now, most companies that are still hiring move to virtual interviews as early as mid-March, which means there are plenty of articles and tips on how to excel in a virtual interview. And I would summarize it in really like two main components. So the first one has to do with things like your broadband speed, turning off other programs so there's no noise, making sure your lighting is good, and, even prevent interruptions like having a cat walk, by your desk. Although I find situations like that can actually create humor.
Yes. We actually, that happened to someone that we interview. Their cat jumped on the couch.
Well, yes, unless this interviewer was actually not a cat person and was a dog person. Otherwise, it should be fun. So that's that part. Like everything you can control in terms of, your environment, right? And then the second part, which obviously is the more important part, is the content and your responses. So, for example, I would make sure to have at least 2 examples for every question you think they may ask, because it's possible during this time, the handoff, the virtual handoff or the interview preparation isn't as robust as before, or it's a new, virtual is also new for the company. So being able to think on your feet and say something like, oh, your colleague just asked me a similar question, but I'm happy to give another example, can kind of like showcase that you're always prepared, that you're not just preparing for an interview, but you really have many stories that you can pull out to share.
Yes. And, I always say that when you finally land, and tell me if I'm wrong, Ginny,
No.
but I always tell candidates or friends, once you land the interview and you have the interview, that is not the best time to be humble. Like you want to sell yourself, right?
Absolutely. Especially women and people of color. If you are the person, if you were the project owner, just say that. I was the project owner, and during this time, I had to collaborate with, maybe people internationally, or I had to, onboard new people. But really, in terms of like effort, I was the facilitator. Do you know what I mean? You're showing that you are the project owner, but that in order to be a successful project owner, you had to be a great collaborator. So you're showing you're not being humble by saying you own the project, but in some way you're saying I am a team player, and that's why you should hire me.
Yes. And also another thing that is important is to know everything you need to know about the company that's hiring you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I advise my client to now ask the question, so what did your company do for your employees or your customers during this time? And if they had to lay off some people, because some companies had to lay off people, but are still hiring a small portion, the question would be, well, what did they do that stood out on how they supported those that were affected? Again, even the company has to talk about the how. That's even important the other way around.
Yes, I agree. So someone went to an interview and landed the job, but now it's time to negotiate salary,
Yes.
right? This is the
Yes.
tough one. What tools or resources can you give someone that doesn't know how to negotiate a salary?
A few things, unless a company specifically said they are unable to negotiate. They wrote that on the job description and they basically make it clear because for financial reasons, but most likely they won't. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to be underpaid for when things are back to normal, that you have to catch up. Again, especially as women and underrepresented minorities in general do not have pay equity. So you actually have more to lose. And sometimes negotiation doesn't have to be about the base, but the total compensation and perks. I had a client that asked for flex days for 4 days a week. I also had another client because she's been working remote for the past 5-6 years successfully at other companies. She was able to demonstrate that and actually negotiated a permanent remote role. So it really depends what's important to you. And even if you thought, okay, well, I seem pretty satisfied with this because based on my research, it's reasonable. I don't see any harm in actually just asking, like, what else is this the best range that you have? So that's actually the tip I would give, is asking what is the range for that particular position that they're considering you for. And sometimes they might say, well, we're considering you for a designer or senior designer, but just ask for that range for, let's say, the senior designer. And if they give you that range, you can say something like, I'm on the higher side of that range, or I'm within that range. I currently volunteer for 81cents.com, which is actually a site that allows women to basically submit what their compensation package has been offered to them.
Oh, wow.
And as a volunteer, we can give suggestions.
Let's shift a little bit. You can give us some networking tips.
We hear about networking and it truly is important, but it's not always equal. So with more than 70% professionals getting hired for roles where they already have a connection or maybe through a referral, there are network gaps for a certain population because, and even LinkedIn listed this in their site, which is there are factors like where you grew up, where you went to school, assuming you did, and where you work determines how strong your network is. So a good example was you even asked me, oh, you worked at Facebook. Tell me more about it. And because that's a name recognition and because, it's a good conversation starter. But not everyone that's necessary works for companies that you've heard of. Or maybe it's a smaller startup, or maybe they have a gap in their working history. So this is where I would, challenge people that if you are a person that doesn't have this network gap, you can pay it forward and you can help people who are normally not within your network. So if they send a thoughtful message for advice or help, perhaps giving them some tips and connecting them with others could help them out. It would encourage them, during this time. So having said that, there are also so many free services right now, including free resume reviews and workshops and quick coaching consulting on LinkedIn. Take up on those. Attend a job search webinars to learn about new COVID resources, follow companies and people that you can learn from, and of course, reconnect with your old coworkers, schoolmates. With so many impacted at this time, no one will be surprised if you are one of those that were affected, and they would be very willing to help.
Oh, awesome advice. Thank you, Ginny. Let's talk about personal branding. This is something that I personally have to work on. How can we create that elevator pitch when we're going into interviews, when we're networking, when we're out there in a community? How can you help us with putting that together?
Yeah. And I think part of that is also this mindset thing. I think personal branding always sounds a little bit aloof or very corporate jargon. What it basically is like the feeling or the connection people think about you, of your work and who you represent. And so, first of all, internal and external branding are equally important, especially if you are still working right now. So internally, that means not just your manager, but their peers and other partners you collaborate with. But let's focus on the external personal branding for a second. The most important thing besides being authentic is, again, to tell the impact of your experience. So the way I see it is what's in between. Read in between the lines of your resume and LinkedIn. So resume and LinkedIn will tell you some of the accomplishments that you've done, but it doesn't tell the story of like, how did you volunteer for that role? Did you try a few times and you actually failed, but you learned about something? Did you have to work with a difficult person, that you had to overcome and now you've built great rapport with people? Did you overcome a weakness that you worked on? So it's everything in between that's interesting about your personal brand. So on LinkedIn, it has one type of what I consider maybe the first layer of personal branding, because you're listing out your all your skill sets and all the things you've done. But it's really beyond that kind of like supporting material of that personal brand. Now, remember, you also have to remember what you don't say on your resume and LinkedIn, which creates a brand that you may not want. So let's say if you had many career pivots, or maybe you job hopped a lot, or maybe, again, I mentioned earlier, you had gaps in your work history. I would reveal those immediately, since likely the people are already thinking about it, like, I wonder why this person job hopped a lot. But if you own it and you say it from the beginning, then it kind of clears people's mind. Okay. So yes, most people think of like external on LinkedIn. And I would agree that this is where recruiters go, is the number one place to go. But it's also potential hiring managers that are, in there. And this is your professional canvas where you can engage with people. You can comment their posts. You can do a write-up. You can upload your awards or maybe podcast interviews that you've done. All of those will contribute a fuller picture of what you're all about. Now, I have one tip for people. Please don't forget to review your profile setting. So if you don't want your company knowing you're looking for new opportunities, turn off the notification. So when you update your profile, not everyone knows that you've updated your profile.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know you could do that. So what I hear you say, you've mentioned LinkedIn a few times. So that is the place to go as far as career development and when you're trying to find a job.
Especially when we're remote. Especially when we're, yes, I would say online, especially if you're also looking at remote work. You're not going to be able to, let's say in the future when we have live meetings or live events, you may not be able to be in another state and at a meetup, but you'll have to network, right? People introduce each other on LinkedIn or through email. So everything's going to be online.
So this is going to be our new normal.
And this is one of our new normal. And I think that people who learn to be able to be flexible in any setting, so the old normal, I guess, and the new normal, basically people who can adapt, those are the ones that is going to thrive.
Such interesting times.
Yes.
What else can you tell us from a recruiter standpoint? What else are you looking for when you think of like a great candidate?
One, you did mention earlier about research, right?
Yes.
But the truth is, if you are applying to, say, 25 to 30 companies, we have to assume you have not memorized, right, all the product innovations and all about the company. But I do think understanding the basics, even just knowing what their company value is would be enough to say, okay, let me see what my experience and what I've done really complements to what they care about most. So that way you can think of examples when they ask you sort of core value related questions. And all companies do this. If they have a core value, they'll likely have some type of typical question that will draw out the candidate's ability to demonstrate those core values.
Do you see any jobs that are going to grow even more because of the pandemic?
Well, I think anything that helps companies and even, entrepreneurs to be successful in the new normal would be one thing. So basically, how do we collaborate online better? How do we communicate better? All of those sectors would be important. I do think things are still changing, right? So there might be ways that companies have to just pivot. So if you are normally a brick and mortar store, you're going to have to pivot, online. So I do think, again, it changes all the time. And LinkedIn is the great place where basically, when you're on there and you use a couple hashtags, one is get hired is one of them.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I'm blanking up the second one. But that's an example where LinkedIn as a company have now dedicated to resources and support for anything COVID related on job loss. So they have webinars, they have series, and they have these hashtags that kind of allow you to follow it. And then you'll see that companies are tagging the same hashtag so you know which companies are hiring, for example.
Okay. Can we talk about side hustles?
Yes. I'm pretty sure people have hidden talents that they don't know about or they haven't elaborated. Now, of course, I make candles, but it doesn't mean I make candles enough that I would actually sell it, right? So there's two types of side hustle. One is because you do want that side income, right? That is a goal of yours. The second one, which I find more people are thinking about, is how do they make basically their career profile or their experience in their career path to be more fruitful, to be more interesting. So for me, I started this when I was at Facebook doing the side coaching. And the reason why was because many people that came to me, because I was in recruiting for Facebook, only wanted to talk to me to get into Facebook. But I wanted to help people to see beyond a company. I want them to see, is there a potential to think of startups instead? Or maybe you actually don't want this company. You haven't really thought about all the potential companies that can allow that can contribute to your great work experience. So I basically went to something that I'm familiar with, that I knew I can make a difference on. It really depends. I don't know if that's the best answer I can give you.
No, that is.
But I do think it's one of those you can explore. There's no wrong way to do this, because the truth about the side hustles is that there's less risk in some way. You can try new things out. Yes. And studies do show that people who actually work, if they are full-time, they're working full-time, but they do have a side hustles, they're actually more engaged at work because they don't feel like they're missing out anything.
100%. I agree. Yes.
So there you go.
You mentioned your coaching. I want to talk about that a little bit, about your career coaching services that you provide. In case someone wants to reach out to you, what services do you provide in that field?
I know when you say career journey or career happiness, it seems so broad. Yeah. But I would say the most common ones these days that I have clients that come to me for is not so much they don't know where to go next or what they want to do, but they want to talk through all the pros and cons. For some people, it's about, do I want to go back to school? For others, feel like maybe they fell into this career because they studied this, or maybe their parents made them study this, and they just don't know if they can take the risk to pivot. So again, this all goes back to the mindset. So even though I'm a career happiness coach, I really think I'm a more mindset happiness coach. Because it can't be, if you're unhappy at many other parts of your life, let's say a relationship, or maybe there's some financial issues, it doesn't matter if I help you find the perfect career job, because everything else will weigh it down and you won't be able to fully, I guess, blossom in that career. So the mindset part, or actually understanding it's multidimensional, that you need many parts of your life to be on track, or at least have plans to be on track in order for you to be feeling fulfilled in your career.
Yes, well said. So, Ginny, this podcast is about leveling up.
Yes,
Level
up.
Level up. And so if there's someone out there that is listening to you and they're really interested about seeking, being a recruiter, for as their career, like what would you say to them? What are the steps to do what you do?
Yes. And it's funny that you asked this question, because if you ask most recruiters, we all fell into it. The truth is, I was already, I guess, in a way, helping people connect with jobs before I went into recruiting. So I was actually in PR and product marketing. And I was working in Asia. And a lot of people were asking me, well, how do you move there? Or how do I become a global professional? So I was connecting with people while I was in Asia, just not knowing I was doing that. And it wasn't until a friend or maybe a mentor had said to me, it sounds like you really, she felt the energy when I was able to help connect people with roles, or at least talk through people's careers. So she said, why not do this as your full-time job? And that's how it ended up being. So I would say for anyone who's thinking about in the people organization, whether that's more HR and recruiting, I'm always happy to talk to people about that. Obviously, you have to have the desire to help people. Yeah, that's part of it. But there's a lot of administrative stuff. Just like any job, there's the stuff that looks great on Instagram. It's filtered. Everything's happy, right?
Yes.
And then there's behind the scenes of, oh, whoa, there's a lot of things that you need to understand in order to be really good in a profession, including being in recruiting. So you have to have both.
Is there anything else that you would like to add or discuss that perhaps we haven't touched on today?
I feel like we would need a follow-up episode of that. I mean, no, there's really a lot we can cover, but luckily there are ways for them to connect with me if they have more questions.
Yeah, and what is the best way for our listeners to connect with you?
Yeah, I live in LinkedIn a lot. So you'll see me there for like articles or maybe inspirational tips on career happiness or the pursuit of one. You can connect with me at Ask Coach Ginny on Instagram or Facebook.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, well, maybe we can one day meet in person.
Yeah, I would love
what
that.
What a concept. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. Please visit the website at www.leveluptribes.com. And please subscribe to the podcast and share with your family and friends. Be sure to tune in to our next episode. Catch you all next time, my beloved tribes.